Okay, good morning, Asma. I'm very happy you could join us in this course. I know you for a while already. I think I was just looking back in my memory, and I think it was 2002 when I was a very young psychiatrist in Afghanistan that I visited with the team of people from Jalalabad, Afghanistan. We visited Islamabad, where you were working in the Institute of Psychiatry, and you were then already one of the rising stars in psychiatry in Pakistan. So we know each other for a long time. I have a great admiration for what you do because you are one of the few people in your country who actually speak out for a more human-centered psychiatry with respect for human rights. So I'm extremely happy you're here. Welcome.
Thank you, Peter.
Now, my first question is actually a little bit about the context where you work, because could you explain a little bit about how psychiatry functions in Pakistan, which is a large country with very few psychiatrists? How is the mental health system organized? Over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Before I go into the mental health care needs and resources in the country, it's important to explain the context a little bit. Pakistan is not much different from the other low and middle income countries in the region in terms, but then we have specific challenges also. So we are a huge country, population over 200 million. There are socioeconomic challenges, poverty, illiteracy, and also a little bit about the geopolitical context that for 4 years Pakistan has been in a conflict with Afghanistan, and this has led to large displacements of population within the country also. We are hosting one of the largest refugee population in the world, and then there have been other challenges like domestic terrorism, counter-terror, security operations, which have led to urban insecurity and militancy. So we know that the burden of common mental disorders, the lifetime prevalence is about at least 20%. And in terms of prices, this can very easily double. So you can imagine that the extent of burden of common mental disorders is huge. In view of the competing health priorities and the dearth of resource and the socioeconomic difficulties, there's a huge burden on the existing health infrastructure. And mental health is not a health priority in the country. We do not have a mental health policy. We have a legislation on a piece of paper for the past 2 decades, but there is no systematic implementation of that. So at the moment, there are clusters of mental health professionals, mostly psychiatrists, some clinical psychologists in urban centers. But in an average district, which could have a population of about 1 million, we would at best have 1 qualified psychiatrist. So most people who would have a mental disorder would need to travel for a couple of 100 miles at least and pay for the travel and then pay for the consultation fee because to see somebody probably in the private sector. So the expense is huge and there are follow-up difficulties. Now, not just that the quality of the number of mental health professionals is inadequate and that there is no integration at the primary care level. So also the training of psychiatrists, there are gaps there. For example, any doctor who's graduating has very little exposure to training in psychiatry. So you can understand that most doctors who are working in the primary care or even as medical officers in tertiary care centers in the emergency departments, they have very little information about diagnosing or managing even common mental disorders, even like depression, for example. And the mental health professionals, particularly the psychiatrists who are trained through a rigorous process of 4 years, even their practices are largely centered on a biomedical model. So there is very little skill of psychosocial interventions. This is the kind of context that we are working in.
Yeah, and that's a very sobering picture that you sketch. Like the needs are very immense, and it's very hard to reach the people who need the services most. That's actually what I learned from what you say. Now, we've in this unit been talking about MHGAP as a tool to bring mental health closer to where people actually are living. And I know you have experience with MHGAP. You've been working with, I think IMC was that, where you were training staff in a conflict-affected area around MHGAP. So could you explain a little bit about MHGAP in Pakistan and your experiences with that? In what way do you think, and you can be critical, in what way do you think MHGAP could help addressing the problems that you sketched in your answer just now? Over.
So MHGAP, in my view, is a wonderful tool. It's an excellent tool, very much needed in countries like Pakistan. And it's designed to fill in the gap, designed to help doctors learn how to make clinical decisions. MHGAP doesn't waste any time going into the theoretical backgrounds. It just goes right to the point. It gives you these very sharp steps, how to diagnose a disorder, how to manage, when to do what. So MHGAP is a very good tool. The problem with application of MHGAP, there are, I think, two kinds of problems. The first is that to implement these guidelines, the context is missing. So, for example, even if you do a 5-day training for a group of doctors, that's not what MHGAP training is about. MHGAP training is about making sure that they have ongoing supervision at the place of work, where they work. And you need to have that kind of trained resource for supervision also. In my view, there is a misconception in maybe countries like Pakistan that you can just do an initial training and you've done MHGAP. When I say that the context is missing, I also mean that the infrastructure at the primary care level might not be developed enough for implementing the guidelines. For example, there are no information systems in place, so you can't even collect information after training a doctor that how many patients of depression or how many people has he seen with psychosis in 1 month. Then the drugs, although there are just a few handful of drugs that MHGAP guidelines mention, but even if those basic psychotropic drugs are not available, again, it becomes very difficult for a doctor to start managing people with mental disorders in the community. So the one problem is that the initial training is only part of it. You need effective referral pathways. You need trained supervisors. You need drugs available. You need, some degree, some kind of information system. The second problem that I see with MHGAP is that, so the guidelines will broadly give you for example, I'll use an example of suicide here. So the MHGAP HIG says in the assessment that please check if the patient has any thoughts about self-harm or if there have been any acts of self-harm. Now, saying this, so those of us who have been training, primary care or non-specialist in MHGAP, we know that during the training, we need to use clinical questions to demonstrate how this assessment should be followed. So telling a primary care physician that go and assess the risk for suicide is not enough. So the assessment then needs to be delivered with standardized questions. We must have more focus on helping non-specialists develop the skills so that once the guideline is telling them that they have to assess the severity of depression or risk of suicide, they must have the tools to, assess that. So that's one part, that how to assess those signs and symptoms, and giving standardized interview questions or clear guidelines about what they are observing when they are looking for a disorder or when they are doing an assessment in the community. The second part is that most of the doctors working in Pakistan, for example, although the medium of medical training is English, but in their clinical workplaces, they do not speak English. They will either speak the national language, or if you go to peripheral provinces, they will speak the regional languages. And their training, to train them, we need to empower them to ask these questions in the regional languages. So therefore, this is also a misconception that once MHCAP guidelines are available, then it's going to be very easy. Any mental health professional, if he or she has like 20 years of experience and teaching experience, can go in and they can train people. So translating these guidelines and adapting them to the local culture. For example, I'll go back to the example of suicide. To assess the risk of suicide, in clinical context, we are trained to ask questions like how do you see the future? And have you ever had any thoughts of harming yourself or ending your life? But when you translate these questions in Urdu, for example, they come out so abrupt and so insensitive that it will definitely make any non-specialist very uncomfortable that he or she is asking this question. Now, there is already a misconception that asking somebody about suicidal ideation is like giving them ideas. You are putting ideas into their head. And then on top of it, the questions are so abrupt, or, they are not culture sensitive in that way. So the guidelines need to be contextualized, adapted, translated. They need to be explained. And all this should be done in a standard way so that different trainers in the country can follow the same kind of format. So these are some of my initial thoughts about MHCAP guidelines.
That's wonderful, Asma. This is a very rich answer, and I'm very happy with the things that you mentioned, because I think these resonate very strongly with my experience as well. And that often people think about MHCAP as that initial guide, that tool, and once you give it to a doctor and you train him for a few days, then the problem will be solved. And I cannot agree more with you when you say that actually you need also to enable these practitioners to use their skills, which means you have to change the context in which they work. Sometimes it's also like the built environment, that you have a place where you can speak with someone with some confidentiality. If you are a medical doctor and you see 100 people per day, it's very difficult to really follow the MHCAP guidelines if you just are not allowed to take a little bit more time in a context of privacy. And of course, as you know, because I worked in Afghanistan, it resonates very strongly with me what you say about cultural context. The way you ask a question, if you ask the questions literally how we formulated it in the MHCAP to a Pashto-speaking woman, you won't get a clear answer. It's just too direct. So thanks very much for your rich answers. Now, there is one more thing that actually I would like to ask you as well, because I know you have been quite active in training, in capacity building, and I think that's what you mentioned as well. MHCAP is not just an incident, but it is a part of a longer process of transformation. Then you can, and in that way, the tool can be useful. Now, Pakistan is a huge country, and I know you've been involved in capacity building through online methods, also because sometimes there are security risks. Could you say a little bit about that? Given all what you said, can you do capacity building for general practitioners through online methods? What are your thoughts about that? Over.
So over a period of years, we've had some ad hoc experience of imparting online trainings, particularly focusing on MHCAP guidelines as well. I did a small project where we were trying to support basic health units spread over 5 provinces in the country. And the experience initially, it was very difficult for us to conduct these kind of trainings. And really, we had to train ourselves. And I'm not saying that doing one initiative trained us. I mean, we just became more aware of difficulties. But what has happened post-COVID is that the government of Pakistan is now initiating they have agreed to initiate a mental health and psychosocial support project. And I have been designing that for the past few months now. The objective is that we could, in a way, introduce a scalable model of providing MHPSS support during humanitarian crisis if needed. Because of the nature of the pandemic and the risks associated with that, we were forced to think of using digital technology. So the central core element of our project is a web-based digital design, which is, we have designed it at multiple levels following the recommendations by the Interagency Standing Committee. And we are focused on the task shifting approach so that at multiple levels we can train people, build a mental health task force. So at tier 1, it will be community focused interventions, and we have been adapting. So what we did was that we looked at all the evidence that exists at the moment. For example, for the tier 1, we were looking at psychological first aid. For tier 2, we were trying to develop a module which could help people, assess their own stress levels. And if they were going into moderately to high stress levels, then they could ask for first do the basic management steps themselves and then seek help also, which appears to be quite relevant to help the first responders during the COVID emergency. And at the third level, it's a person-to-person intervention for common mental disorders. And for the third level, we have been designing the MHCAP guidelines, adapting them to our context, translating them, adding the questions, and then making an app out of this. Once we do this, so Peter, you can imagine that a country with 200 million population and a handful of psychiatrists, of which there are even lesser who would be interested in building the capacity of the primary care. So we need to build a specialist task force also. We need to train the specialists also so that they can become trainers and supervisors for MHCAP. And also, so in this project, what we have done is that we want to handpick trainers who are interested in this kind of work, who will not be so consumed up by the biological practices that they have, who are willing and more flexible to learn different interventions and teach others. And also, it's very important, certain attributes are very important in training MHCAP guidelines for non-specialists. And one of that is that we can't go into a classroom and start telling the primary care physicians of how to see their patients or how to help people. They might have been doing this job for decades. So it's important to understand where they are coming from, what their existing skill is, and then build on that. And this is a very big challenge for trainers who are in a hierarchical position in Pakistan, and they are very used to training with authority. So MHCAP training is quite different in that way, in my view. So this project that we are designing, for this, we are hoping that we'll have this app for MHCAP. This app is slightly different from the MHCAP app that the WHO has. One, this is for HIG, MHCAP HIG. Two, like I explained before, we have translated it. So now the user will have an option of choosing a language right at the onset. And then there are these questions that he can ask or she can ask. So the app is not just going to say that assess risk for self-harm. The app is actually going to take him through the steps and give examples of questions that he can ask also. And then this data can be sent back to a centralized database where we are consolidating information. And through the app, he can connect people to specialists. So at any given point in time, even if he or she is suspecting that this person might have psychosis but is not sure, very quickly that same person will be transferred to a specialist who is also available in the same integrated web system. And maybe within hours or within the same day, the specialist can do a quick assessment and then say, yes, I think this is psychosis, and yes, you are thinking right. So the ongoing kind of job supervision becomes possible. So it's a design, and we are hoping to start implementation soon and then learn from this experience.
This is fantastic. This is so exciting, and keep me updated. Promise me, because this is really, I think, the way to go. And I think in a country like Pakistan, it's also possible to use the web-based tools. So yeah, I have lots of questions. We must end this interview. It was really great, and you highlighted very important points. I just wanted to ask you, perhaps, if there is, to the students who are working in humanitarian MHPSS or aspire to do so, with regards to mental health in primary care, is there some advice that you'd like to give to them, something that you want to keep them in mind?
I think the last point that I would really like to make for the participants is that each one of them has the ability to be a part of mental health care that is so much needed during humanitarian crisis. The mental health care has been mystified for, like decades now. The participants of the course must leave this discussion understanding that they are extremely valuable. Mental health care is not to be restricted to the specialist. If they are unable to understand what we are saying, the problem lies with us in explaining it. The problem doesn't lie in the content of what needs to be done. I have been training non-specialists for over 2 decades now. And now I make a joke out of this that I don't even want to talk to a psychiatrist. Give me a school teacher and I want to explain to that school teacher how to detect depression.
Yes.
So all of you, all of the participants are empowered people. Mental health care is easy. Do not be fooled by the words that we use and the way we present our case. It's probably we still have a long way to learn how to actually teach non-specialists, but all of them can do wonders. And it is very easy, it's simple. If people can learn the symptoms of COVID and lay people can diagnose or follow instructions for prevention and following and help others, take them for their testing when needed, then there is no reason why the same cannot be done for depression. Yeah. So this is my message.
Totally agree. Thanks a lot, Asma. This was great talking with you. Thank you very much for taking the time, and see you next time. We keep in touch.
Thank you, Peter. All the best for the course. Take care.